Hello, and welcome to the Notary Business Talk, the podcast dedicated to sharing ideas, strategies, and techniques to help grow your business and improve your life. And now, with more than 2 decades of notary business experience, your host, Abraham Zamora, the notary entrepreneur.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Notary Business Talk. My name is Abraham Zamora, and I am the Notary Entrepreneur. And in this episode, we're going to discuss the most common notary document errors we see notary signing agents make. And today, I have a very special guest who's going to tell us exactly what those errors are, because this individual is day in, day out dealing with notaries, loan signings, and everything that goes along with what a signing agency does and runs and how it operates. But before I get into actually introducing our guest, I just want to quickly say a special thanks to all those who are members and support me through Patreon. You guys are helping fund this show and make it possible, so thank you for that. And for those who want to learn more about Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/notary. Now, let me introduce this individual. We've been friends since 2000 is it, Travis? I think 2001.
Yeah, I believe 2020, 2021, around there.
Yeah, 2000. What did I say? 2000. Oh, I said 2020. That's what it was. That's what I meant to say. Travis Meyers is actually the director of operations at Unlimited Inc., which, for those of you who are loyal fans of this show, is Ronnie Mickel's nationwide signing service company. And that's actually how we met. We met through Ronnie Mickel. And he basically is the head honcho behind the scenes. He's the guy that runs the operations. So if you ever get a signing scheduled through through Unlimited Inc., he's behind the whole thing, just making it work. And so he sees, Travis is handling hundreds and hundreds of orders, over 1,000, I would say, every month at this point. And so he knows kind of what are the most common errors, and he's going to help us with that. So without further ado, let me introduce Travis Meyers. Travis, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Abraham. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm glad you made it on. And so let's go ahead and, whenever we have a new guest, we like to kind of find out how they got into the industry and what made them get into the whole notary world. Because when you become a notary, there's so many different ways that you can sort of branch out within this industry, and you're a good example of that. But give us a little backstory. How did you get into this? How did you get started in the notary world?
Yeah, definitely. I'll be happy to discuss that. So prior to the whole notary gig, I worked as a mortgage loan processor for a lender. Mm-hmm. And I always kind of say I was more of a hybrid loan officer, loan processor. I did have an MLS number. And, at that time I got into it, prior to that, I didn't have any real estate experience. I was doing travel sales. And so I just, wanted to get into something different. So I got a good job offer at a company that I still really like a lot. But I did that for about 3 years, and we would order mobile notaries all the time for our refinances. A lot of times title will order the mobile notary themselves, but through our vendor that took care of most of our refinance transactions, I had to put in the request with them. And for about 3 years at the bank, and when I was there, bear in mind interest rates were really low, like 2.5, 2.75, 3.25. So our pipelines were very, very heavy. And if anybody's ever worked in lending or title and escrow, it's a really stressful job, especially when rates are down, just because of sheer volume. Right. And I would look at the fees to see what the mobile notaries were making off of these signings, and I thought that was a pretty neat gig, because here I am at the bank, breaking my back in escrow, loan per loan, trying to get these closed. Some of them close in 3 weeks, some of them close in 3 months. And it gets really challenging when the rates go down, because volume gets out of control. I think when I left in 2020, September of 2020, I had like 74 or 76 loans from application to closing. And, what that means, at least for the bank I worked at, is at about 35 loans, a 40-hour work week gets very unmanageable. So it's, the work never ends. And, just those loans, not one of them goes right. And the ones that do go right, they all want to bump up the closing date, which causes its own challenges. So more so, I, looked at the mobile notary fees, and I love driving. I have, driven part-time for, Uber and Lyft, because I just like driving and talking with people. And I thought that would be really neat to kind of be out there on my own and only worry about myself and drive all day, listen to audiobooks, do some signings. I had the knowledge already. I knew I'd be very good at it. And it was an opportunity to be self-employed and not have to report to anybody. And so I left my lending job and I went through some third-party training and really did a lot of research with this, got involved in some Facebook groups and some notary groups, just to see what all the chatter is about, and also too to gauge your competition as well.
Yeah.
And I started marketing myself, and I think my notary career really took off when COVID happened, and I was doing a bunch of signings, sometimes 3 a day, sometimes 7, 8. I think my highest signing count was 11 or 12. I'd have to go back to my logs, but they were long, grueling days. But, I really, really put in the effort because I wanted it to work, and I really wanted it, and I did very well at it. And then, I met Ronnie at Unlimited Ink along the way, and I became his number one guy, and we started talking a lot. And he kind of figured out that I worked in lending and I knew how to drive a pipeline, and his business was growing substantially at that time, and he needed somebody to come in and help him out because it is a lot of work. And so he brought me in, kind of showed me the system and the pipeline, and asked if I was interested, and let alone asked if it was something I was capable of. And I just was pretty much, yes, absolutely. It was hard, leaving the leaving the road, because I really liked that independence and, not having to do a signing if I wanted to. But, of course, it was looking in the long run, too, because as we're experiencing now, it is a down market. So signings are a lot slower for most notaries. So I knew that was going to just be better for me in the long run. So that's how I became director of operations at Unlimited Ink.
All right. Now, you said it's a lot of work. I mean, I don't think a lot of people on the other side, like the notaries, really understand what it takes to run a signing company. And kind of, can you give us a kind of brief description on what do you mean by it's a lot of work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, our pipeline volume, and when I say the term pipeline, that's just a term for, our system and the amount of signings that, we have in it. And our platform, we use signing order. So if there's any notaries listening to this, they're probably familiar with signing order. It's one of the the major platforms out there, next to SnapDocs and ZigSig and probably a few others, Signature Sync.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there are days that we'll have 150 to 200 orders, and it's real estate. So unless it's a refinance with a rescission, most of them are sign, scan, and ship same day. So these orders come in, and I've compartmentalized my team. I've got schedulers. They're going to schedule the orders and get it out to the notary. The hangups that we experience there are rural signings. Those can be really, really tough to get assigned, especially assigned in time when the title company wants them to take place. So document execution, scans, and cutoff can be made that day. And then I've got a couple of gals on my communications team that run our inbox and notary support chat, because we're really big on support to the notaries. You get that a lot in the signing service world, where you call the signing service and nobody picks up. Nobody's there to help you. We are really big on communication, because one drop of communication can really ruin the closing of somebody's home.
Sure.
Our inbox, especially during the week, sometimes we get 100 emails within 15, 20 minutes. So we always want to get those answered promptly, and we track all of the issues that happen. And then we also have quality assurance. So when the notaries go out and do the signings, we do require scans, and we do review them just to make sure they are going back to title without any critical errors on them that are going to hold up the closing of somebody's home. I mean, we even go a little bit further. We also pre-review the closing packages prior to the signing, and I'll speak of some of the documents today.
Sure.
And we set up special instructions in the order on how to execute these documents, just to ensure that we are covering our basis and making sure the notary is equipped, for that order to go out and get these docs done right. Because one closing can really ruin your day. And we deal with title as well. And, it's a snowball effect, right? I'm like, we're under pressure from title to get to get this loan signed or seller file, whatever it may be.
Right.
Enough time for it to sign, scan, and ship same day. Well, the escrow officer, they are under tremendous pressure by the lender and the borrowers and the realtors. Same thing. The lender, they're under pressure by the realtors and the borrowers. So it just keeps going on and on and on and on. So I've just compartmentalized our team, kind of divvied it up into departments. That way we can run effectively and make sure we get the notary questions answered, and make sure that somebody is always on the phone when they call. And if not, we take the voicemail and answer it right away.
Excellent. Excellent. And, I think one of the things that I hear from notaries who reach out to me, and one of the things that they appreciate about this show is that they kind of get an insider view of what's going on the other side. It's very helpful to them. And I know we've talked about this in the past, and we'll get into the documents that most notaries tend to make, and kind of how to maybe help avoid making the errors that cause a lot of the problems with notaries. But you come from the mortgage world. Now you're in the signing agent world. You were a notary. I mean, you're sort of the trifecta here. You've done all three areas, and you have all this experience. And I know we've talked about this before, but where do you see the industry going from here? Like, and I know you can't predict the future, but how do you see things potentially playing out? Like, if you had to bet money, right? How do you prepare? What do you think is going to come in the future in regards to the notary industry, and as a notary signing agent, or just general notary? What should we prepare for, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a question I ask myself all the time, and I still don't know an answer for it. But you can see how it has evolved.
Right.
RON signings are, becoming more and more popular. We are doing them a lot more on seller files, cash-only deals, and, general notary work as well. RON signings on a buyer file where there is a lender involved, or refinance, I'm not seeing as many of those, but I know there are some lenders that are allowing them. Now, is everything going to move over to RON anytime soon? Definitely not, because they can be more challenging to get done than a in-person signing, because there is all sorts of road bumps at the front end of the signing, the big one being KBA. Signer, presents their ID, scans it, and has to answer those 4 or 5 knowledge-based questions. And I think the platforms are different one to another. I think some of them you have to get 4 out of 5 right. Some of them you have to get all of them right. But that will stop a closing if KBA can't get answered. So I don't think everything would move electronically until there is a better screening up front that runs better, that's more accurate, and has less hard stops to proceed to the signing. But some states are allowing biometrics where the ID gets scanned and their system, verifies that this person is who they say they are. But that is a good question, because I ask myself that all the time, because we do live in the year 2023, and showing up to somebody's home with 100 to 200 pieces of paper and having them sign it is a little archaic for the year that we live in. So I would imagine in some way, shape, or form, it's probably going to move to mostly or all digital and some, in some kind of manner, whether that's RON or something else.
Interesting. And just to be clear, what does KBA stand for? What is that an acronym for?
Yeah, so KBA is knowledge-based assessment. So when the notary meets with the signer in the RON session, in order to proceed to the signing, they have to pass the ID, the ID screening. And every platform handles it a little bit differently, but I know they do an ID scan, but the notary will send them a link and the platform generates these questions. And like some of them along the lines of, is Jane Doe your grandma? Or which one of these names is your grandma? Which one of these addresses have you ever been associated with?
Right.
And it does a soft credit pull. So that's how it generates those questions. But yeah, it's just an extra layer of protection just to ensure that person is, who they, are saying they are.
Got it. Good. Now, part of your job at Unlimited Inc. is to make sure that a notary successfully goes from being scheduled on an order to taking the documents, getting them signed, and then the ultimate goal is to get those documents back, completed accurately to the client, to the lender, to escrow, or to title, whoever it is that's going to be getting those documents back. What do you see? And now we're going to get to the point of this podcast. And which individual documents do you typically see come back with the most amount of errors that you're constantly having to get notaries to fix and correct? Let's start with kind of naming those off. Which ones are the most common ones you see that have errors?
All right, and you just want me to name all of them off, and we'll get into the my explanation of each one.
Yeah, let's name off the top ones that you see, and then kind of and then we can get down to each one and tell us what exactly the notaries tend to do wrong and what they can do to fix it.
Sure. So first one, and we don't see this one too much anymore just because rates are up and there's not a whole lot of refinances going on, but that'll come back probably sooner than we're expecting. Notice a right to cancel. You're going to see those in a refinance package on a primary residence, home equity line of credit, or reverse mortgage. As the federal government states, anytime you refinance either of those three products, you have a 3-day rescission period. And then the other big one is the uniform residential loan application, the missing initials on the joint credit lines.
Okay.
And then other not so obvious documents where you really need training to kind of understand that these, why these are in here and what needs to be done to them are U.S. income tax returns not being signed, letters of explanation not be signed, and then the termite reports not being signed for the VA loans.
Right. Okay. So let's get into each one individually. Let's start with the first one.
Okay, so the notice of right to cancel. When I started working for Unlimited Inc., this was hands down the big one that came back wrong. I don't have a certain percentage, but it's a lot. Most of them, at least I would say 80%, would come back incorrect when the dates had to be added or modified. So this document, it has 2 dates on it that are speaking to the buyer, because when you refinance on a primary residence, just for conversation's sake, it applies to a HELOC and a home equity line of credit and a reverse mortgage. But I'll just kind of focus it on the primary residence because I don't think I need to re-articulate those 3 every time.
Sure.
But on a primary residence, if you close on your primary residence on a refinance, you have 3 full days to rescind the transaction.
Right.
And that's a federal regulation. I think that was implemented after, the 2008 financial crisis with Dodd-Frank, the CFPB. But there's 2 dates that speak to the borrower on that. It's the transaction date and the rescission date.
Mm-hmm.
If those 2 dates are not correct. It is the notary's responsibility to guide the signer to strike those dates, initial, and write in the correct dates. And I do believe there is some training out there that encourages the notary to strike the dates, but I don't, because that's, in my professional opinion, that's not the notary space to touch. Typically the only thing the notary should be adjusting and touching on the documents and initialing is notarial section, Patriot Act, and if title has a their form of the lender's Patriot Act, like an identification statement. Anywhere else, the notary shouldn't be putting hands on the document and making any changes. But the transaction date will be wrong a lot, because when these lenders publish their documents, they just go into their system and they select the dates. So a lot of times they printed it out or drew it the day before the signing took place. So at the top of the notice to right to cancel, it'll say I forget exactly what it says, but it says like this, the transaction date is 100% of the time the day the signing takes place. So if that is dated a day or two before or after, what should happen is those signers need to strike it. They need to initial when they strike that. And that's what I want to encourage all notaries to make sure that happens on the documents, whether you are striking the state and county or your notarial sections, the signers are, maybe they spelt their name wrong and you got, the lender spelt their name wrong and you got permission for them to change it. Any strike or omission from a document should be initialed, because the initials are the acknowledgement that there was a change on the document. So with the notice to right to cancel, when the transaction date, so, we're doing this podcast here. Today is September 10th.
Yeah.
So if I was looking at the right to cancel and the transaction date said September 9th, I would just tell, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Signer, what you're going to do is you're going to put one line through the September 9th, 2023. Since both of you are signing this document, please initial, so you're acknowledging the change. And then you're going to write in 9/10/2023, as that is the day the signing is taking place. And then at the bottom of the document, there's also the rescission date. With the rescission date, you can visit the NNA. They have a rescission calendar. You should print that out and bring that with you and carry it with you at all times. I do not recommend manually counting dates. Even for myself, being in mortgage lending, I manually counted dates all the time because things are just moving so fast. I just didn't have time to look at a calendar every time. But as a notary, I always use the calendar. You always want to, double check yourself, because one mistake can just send you back to the closing table. So better safe than sorry. But if we were sitting here on Sunday, September 10th, the rescission date should read the 13th. And if the rescission date does not read the 13th, so let's say it read the 12th or the 11th, same thing that you do on the transaction date. You just pull up your rescission calendar, look to see what the rescission date is for the day that signing is taking place, and tell the signers one line through that date, both of you initial, write in the correct date. So that way they have that correct rescission, because the lenders typically are not going to fund that loan unless those dates are correct.
Right.
And I do get a lot of, kickback from the notaries about that. Oh, well, the lenders, they should draw their documents differently. Like, I don't recommend having that attitude. And if you want to know why, go work in lending and see what they got to put up with. If the docs are good and all the fees are calculated as such, they're not going to redraw docs just to make sure everything lines up. So that's definitely the big one with the refinances. And at Unlimited Inc., we kind of hedge that, as I do have a pre-file reviewer that goes in there and checks those dates and puts in notes to the notary on what to change them to and how to have them struck and initialed. So we have an instruction for that. Because a lot of notaries don't know that that is their responsibility. But yes, title expects you to know that. And if those come back incorrect, more than likely you're going to be called to revisit that closing table again.
Yeah. Now, you said right now we're not seeing a whole lot of that because it is a bit of a downturn. Rates are high, but you
Right.
did say you see that changing possibly soon. What did you mean by that? I mean, are you thinking things are going to turn around soon or what?
I hear. Of course, I have to make the disclaimer. Okay.
Of course, of course.
I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial advisor. But if I could predict the real estate market, I would definitely take all the money I have and bet it on a day trade and retire tomorrow.
Right.
But hopefully, I am hoping in 2024 rates will start dropping. We'll have to see what the Fed decisions are. These next couple of meetings. Hopefully they pause the rates and hopefully they pivot at some time in 2024 if they feel like inflation's going to go down and start lowering the rates, which will affect mortgage rates. Because in my professional opinion, if rates drop by a point, and in the real estate world, if you're not familiar what a point is, it's just another term for percent.
Mm-hmm.
So, if rates drop from 6.5% to 5.5%, all of these folks that have been buying at 6.5% and 7% for the past couple of years are probably going to start refinancing, and those are going to start hitting the books again.
Okay. So if we see it, this is a big if, right? But cause and effect, law of causality.
Right.
If we see rates go down, there's a very good chance we're going to see refinances come up. And that's where you'll want to really pay attention to these notice of right to cancels and making sure you do what Travis said with the initialing and changing the dates. And that's a very good tip, by the way, getting that NNA's calendar. That's
Yeah, definitely use that. Print it out, keep it in your computer, and they reissue one every year. It's really handy. And, if you're not sure, always contact your contracting company or signing service to get advisement, because sometimes around Thanksgiving and Christmas, the rescission date, they will do it a little bit differently. If there's if Christmas is on a Friday, but
Right.
they're still closed on that Thursday, that's the only time where I typically have to reach out to title and ask them, like, okay, hey, what do you want for this date? But you do want to pay attention to that. But usually Christmas and Thanksgiving are kind of the only ones where they're going to be different or can be.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I will go ahead, and this is coming straight from Jennifer, one of my loyal listeners out of Texas, who says, put links to everything you talk about in your show notes. So I will put a show note link in the description so that you guys can go to the NNA website and find the rescission calendar, which is great. What's the next document that you typically see with errors, Travis?
So I would say the other really big one is the new Uniform Residential Loan Application, aka the 1003.
1003.
Yeah, the good old 1003. So they just redid the 1003 in the past couple of years, and it looks a lot different. And if there is an application for joint credit, meaning there's two people or more on the note, that's the easiest way to explain that one, because whomever is on that loan application is going to also be signing the note. Those documents kind of go hand in hand. Same thing with the 4506Cs. Who's ever on the loan application or note will be signing the 4506Cs. So those three documents are all kind of tied in with one another as to who will be signing one of those. So the 1003, there is on the first page under tab 1A, I believe it's 1A personal information. There is a little small initial line, and it's almost right in the middle of the page, and it's not super obvious. It's almost like they drew up that document just to give the notaries an extra challenge. But there is I'm trying to think how I can explain this without having the document screen shared, but it needs to be initialed by the individual's name on that first page of the 1003 only. And right next to that initial line, it'll say other borrowers. So each borrower will have their own 1A section, and it will be on a different page. So if you're going through the documents and you're sitting across the table and you got two people sitting there and they're both on the note. Just because you have two people sitting across the closing table, don't think that they're both on the note, because there's a lot of non-borrowing spouse situations that go on.
Right.
But if you see two signatures on the note, I always would have it triggered in my head, like, okay, I know when I get to the loan application, these initials are going to need to go, on these sections. And it can get tricky too, because sometimes two individuals are on one loan application and sometimes two individuals are on separate loan applications. So you just want to always look for 2 pages, that 1A black tab, and that person's name that is printed right underneath that 1A black tab must initial on that joint credit initial line. That one gets missed all the time because it is not super obvious. And even in an experienced notary, if that document was brand new and it's the first time that you're seeing it, would probably be missed because it's just not obvious. You have to know that part is there.
Yeah. Now, just to be clear, because sometimes you're right, it does. There are 2 1003s for the separate borrowers. Will the name be printed if it's just one of the 2 borrowers on one of the 1003s? Will the name near the initial be printed for just that one? Or if there's 2 on the same application, will both names be printed near that first page initial?
Yeah. So, and you can, you can probably, just find a sample one online, for anybody listening to this. But typically you have the first page and it's that black 1A tab. And then right below it is the borrower's name. And then just below it, it'll say initial here if applying for joint credit. And over to the right of that, it says other borrowers. That's just the trigger that individual's name printed underneath that 1A tab needs to initial there, because there's other borrowers on the loan. Now, when it says other borrowers, so let's say you have, in the other borrower section, Jane Doe, and then John Doe already initialed, there's going to be another page where Jane Doe's name is underneath a 1A tab. And that other borrower section, it'll be inverted. So you have 1A tab, John Doe, he initials for joint credit, and to the right it says other borrowers, Jane Doe. Then when you find that next page that has that 1A tab, then it's going to say Jane Doe, initial for joint credit, then other borrowers, it will say John Doe. So that's, pretty much how the easiest way I've been able to program my brain to, identify it and, have somebody initial and provide direction to the notaries that have questions about that on our orders.
Excellent. And let me screen share this. People can actually see this. So can you see that? Okay. There,
perfect. Yeah, that's it.
So for those of you who are just listening and you want to check out what we're talking about, just head over to my YouTube channel and this podcast will be on there. And, okay. So what you're talking about is this little line right here.
There it is, right there. Mm-hmm.
Where it says initial. Now, it'll say type of credit. I'm applying for individual credit. I am applying for joint credit. And it says 1 or 2 borrowers. What should be on there? What would be checked off if we're going to just do one person initialing that?
So it will already be pre-selected from the lender. So
Right.
The only attention that the notary needs to give is to have the individual initial on that initial line.
Right here.
And if you hover your mouse right underneath that 1A tab and that red circle.
Right here.
Yeah. That and whoever name is printed in there and first, middle, last, they initial that initial line.
Okay.
Then if you go over to the right where it says list names of other borrowers applying for this loan,
right,
you just want to use that as a trigger, because if there is a name printed in that section there, that individual's name that is printed underneath that 1A tab needs to initial on that initial line. Now, when you get to this page that we're looking at right now, if it is joint credit, the individual's name that is listed in the other borrowers applying for this loan will have a separate page just like this, except their name is underneath that 1A tab. And then the person's name that's on that 1A tab now would be in that other borrower. So that's the best way. And that's how I told my QA team. That's how I explained it to them. I'm like, look, if you see a name in that other borrowers, that's your trigger that person's name pre-printed underneath the 1A section needs to initial there.
Okay, so to keep it simple, if their name is up here, they're the only ones that are going to initial down here.
Yeah, correct. That is correct.
Got it. Okay, good. And then just to recap, for those of you who are newer, it is possible that somebody can have, or a loan packet or a set of documents can have two individuals signing, but only one of them is on the actual loan, which means they'd be the only ones on the note, and as a consequence, would be the only one signing one of these 1003s. But they would still be on title. They would still own the property. They're just not having their credit pulled to qualify for the loan, which means they would be on the deed of trust, for example, but not necessarily on the note or on the 1003s. Is that what you were referring to earlier, Travis?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay, good. All right, good. So now, okay, let's go to the next error or document that typically gets messed up on.
Yeah. So the other ones, I call these the not so obvious to be signed documents.
Okay.
And I only knew that they needed to be signed when I became a notary because my underwriters put in funding conditions and I would read those all of the time. So if, to explain what funding conditions are is, the lender's underwriters puts in all these conditions that need to happen that, for the closing team or the funders to release funding authorization. And the two that I remembered very, very well are all letters of explanation to be signed at closing and all U.S. income tax returns to be signed at closing. Now, the U.S. income tax returns, they're an easy document to identify because we all file taxes and we all probably have seen a 1040, a million times.
Right.
And typically, those will need to get signed at closing if self-employment income is being used to qualify that borrower for the loan. So, like all of the notaries out here, you are self-employed. If you use your notary income, you're probably going to have to sign your tax returns when you close your home. And the signing of the tax returns, I believe it's just kind of an acknowledgement that the borrower is signing their tax returns, stating that they're true and correct. In case post-closing, there's an audit and it finds out that there was mortgage fraud, they got their signature on their tax returns. Because you can pull a 1040 and, probably easily, create fraud on those. I mean, again, I don't recommend doing that because the lenders will find out. Like, right. We will find out. But the U.S. income tax returns, typically you're going to see those in there when the borrowers are self-employed. And the lenders want them signed at closing. You have to look for the signature spaces on them, but this is what I recommend to cover all bases with tax returns. Look for the signature blocks on them, because if they include somebody's full-blown tax returns, and some tax returns are 50 to 100 plus pages. Usually the ones we come across aren't that big, but they can get lengthy, especially if the borrowers are involved in an S corp and they got long business returns, etc. But there is usually a large, you can Google up a U.S. income 1040, but
is that it right there?
Yeah, that's it right there. Look for the large black arrow and the words saying sign here next to it. And then what I also recommend, just to cover your basis, is not all of the pages of the tax return have a signature line on them. So when you get to the ones that don't have that black arrow that says sign here, just have the individuals on the note sign and date at the footer of the page. And that'll cover your basis, because some lenders are really picky and want every single page of them signed and dated. We have had them get kicked back to us that way before. But you just want to look for the black arrow, says sign here, and any pages that don't have that, just use the footer of the paper and they can sign and date.
Down here. Okay, good. All right, that's good stuff, man. All right, good. Okay, and then you said the other one was the letters of explanation.
Yeah, these are challenging to find, because the challenges with these ones is a lot of times they do not have signature lines on them. So your brain kind of has to be able to identify a letter of explanation. And again, and anybody listening to this podcast, use the internet to, learn what these things look like, and help your brain identify them. Because that's what I do a lot at Unlimited Ink. I get a question I don't know, I go research it online. Internet is a beautiful tool. So letters of explanation, what these are typically the borrower explaining some type of, something along the lines of like their credit or their finances, maybe a bad credit decision they made in the past, or making a declaration about properties that they own. Like a letter of explanation that I see a lot is, it'll say, I, Travis Meyers, owner of property located at 12345 Notary Street, Phoenix, Arizona, do not have homeowners association dues on this property, because they're declaring they don't have HOA dues on that property, because the lender wants to know if properties have HOA dues, if they have real estate owned, if they're buying another one, because they have to include that as a debt. Other stuff that I've seen before, individuals, they'll state, yes, I've owned this property. I went through bankruptcy 7 years ago. So you just kind of have to know what the intent of the document typically is about. But if you see a letter, of explanation of them explaining some type of, credit issue or financial decision, you want to have those signed and dated, and it looks just like a business typed letter. The easiest way I've been able to identify them is 99.9% of the time they're typed. They are on a blank piece of paper. They don't have a letterhead. They won't have like title or the lender's logo on them. They usually won't have the little lender's barcode at the bottom, but sometimes the lender does put that barcode at the bottom, and they're just explaining some type of decision or explanation of credit. But again, to anybody listening to this, Google letter of explanation, and they all look the same. It's a blank piece of paper, no letterhead. And you just want to be able to read it and just have the individual sign and date, because they don't always have signature lines on them. But if you go through the closing instructions, usually you're going to see the funding condition in there for the LOEs to be signed at closing.
And I put one on the screen. Is that kind of an idea of
exactly? It's exactly what it looks like.
Okay, good.
Every single one of them. Sometimes they're handwritten too.
Right.
But that is exactly what it looks like. And yeah, at the bottom, you usually won't see signature lines. I wish the lenders would put signature lines, because it makes it a little bit more obvious. And, that's what I've explained to my clients. And anytime I've had to, speak with a lender and these come back unsigned, and I explain to them, I go, you have to understand, most of these notaries have not worked in real estate, and, they don't know. So provide some direction and draw a signature line on them. It's really easy just to, hold down the hyphen key and put a line on that paper.
Yeah. All right, good. So again, if you're listening to the podcast, search Notary Business Talk on YouTube, and you can see the video version of this podcast where we're showing examples of these documents on the screen. So, and then the last one is a termite report, which seems to get people all the time.
So this is a big one, because the VA, on a VA loan, the VA requires the termite report to be signed by the borrowers at closing. Now, some of the termite reports do not have signature lines. So when you are executing a closing package and you see a termite report in there, you want to get that signed if it's a VA loan. And the easiest way to tell if it's a VA loan, just go to the closing disclosure on the very top right. It says type of loan product. If VA is checked and there's a termite report in there, get it signed and dated. Get it signed and dated on the required signature lines. Again, a lot of them don't have required signature lines on them. I know here in Arizona, I think they, on a VA loan, they come out, they do the termite inspection, and then they have to submit it to the Department of Agriculture. I could be wrong on that name. I know agriculture's in it. And then they issue the document, and that's the one the borrower sign and date. But California, they have the termite inspections, all the sections like 1A, 2A, 2B, Cs, and the such, but a lot of them don't have signature lines. So the safest bet with the termite reports is if you do not see a signature line on them, have the borrower sign and date at the footer of the page on every page of the termite inspection to cover your basis. Because what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, oh no, that page isn't supposed to be signed. The easier way to correct that part is for the lender or the title company to throw that signed one away and just print a blank one.
Right.
So it's always better safe than sorry. And I know there's a statement out there, you can never oversign too much.
Yes.
No, that's definitely not the case.
Yes,
But on the tax returns and the termite report, I assure you, it's not going to hurt having that footer of the page signed and dated on every single one.
Now, I'm in California, and my whole career has been in California. They've always looked like this, Travis, where you can.
That's it.
Right. I mean, it literally says termite report or termite. It has the company's logo, and it usually has like a little diagram of the people's house. I mean, do most of them look like this?
Yes. Most of them that I have seen look just like that. And, just a kind of side note here and give you all a little laugh. California was my region when I worked at the bank, and I worked at a bank that did a lot of VA loans. So if you have any questions about a VA loan, I'm the person to go to. And if I don't know, I know somebody that has the answer. And yeah, that's exactly what their termite reports look like. And my experience in lending, the termite reports in California come back with fungus and dry rot, and they are a real challenge to close. So if you see a termite report and a closing package, make sure that's signed, because those folks have already probably been through enough with that loan.
Yeah. And usually there's more than one. I mean, this one's one of 6. So every single page has to be signed, every single page.
Yeah, that's the safest bet. Typically, I would say if there is a designated signature for the buyer, that one's probably going to do it. But again, you never know how picky the lenders are. One lender may want one thing and one lender may want the other, and you might as well, get all of the pages signed so you don't have to worry about anything, because you never know who's going to kick back what for what.
Right. Yeah. Good advice. I mean, this is more like business philosophy, kind of the way you should run your business, period. Good stuff. Yeah. Good. All right. Travis, are there any final kind of words, final things you want to say about this topic of documents and errors when it comes to signing documents?
Yeah. And, maybe we can convene again, but
sure.
What I would say to the notaries is, especially if you're new, get training. If these documents that we went over, if you don't know that this is how you are supposed to execute these documents at the closing table, go get training. You're self-employed. This isn't like showing up to a job where you're a W-2 employee, and you show up and they, put you in training for, 4 to 8 weeks, teach you everything that you need to do, sit with you, monitor your phone calls, and correct you and coach you and make you better. It's all upon you to get the training. So you are equipped, because you want to keep in mind, this is serious business. You better know your stuff if you're going to do this. And I say that with the utmost sincerity. I'm not talking down to anybody, but you better know your stuff, because this is the closing of somebody's home that is in your hands. You going out there and not executing these documents correctly can ruin 3 weeks to 3 months to 4 months of hard work. People's rate locks are expiring. People are closing at the end of the month. And if they don't close at the end of the month, and the closing gets moved to the beginning of next month, and a whole month's of prepaid interest is added onto that closing disclosure. And if they don't have the assets to count for that, then they're no longer qualified for the loan. So it's really critical that you go out there and you get this done on the first shot. But what I do recommend, and some helpful little tips to make you succeed at the closing table, because there can be a lot of distractions. Not every closing and signing is ideal. Trust, I've been to plenty of them myself, where when I got out of that house, I was like, hallelujah. But always double check your work. And I say that with the utmost sincerity. Double check, triple check your work. And some of the supplies that I bought were just so helpful. I bought the little rubber finger or that finger stick, that way you can check every page and get familiar with the documents too. What needs to be done, what. I won't get into all of that, but go through every single page and make sure the date is correct, and do as much preventative stuff that you can. When I show up to the closing table, I would draw it on a piece of paper, what the date is, and give that to them to look at during the whole duration of the closing. So they have less of a chance of writing the wrong date. I mean, if you've ever sat down at the closing table, how many times those borrowers ask you, oh, wait, what was the date again?
Yep.
Give them that focus point, and give you that focus point as well. I mean, how many times are you bouncing back in between like today's date and your notary commission date? But give them a reference, and they'll appreciate that. When you take the document back from them, look at it. Was it signed in the right place? Is this today's date that they put down there? And then check that again in your double check, and you're going to have a lot less post-closing issues, and you'll save yourself from driving back to the signing, because it's a lot less time to do those checks and come up with those processes for yourself than having to drive back to the signing location and convene with the borrowers again, especially if there's two of them and you have to get two signatures. Like, it is a real hassle to make a second trip out to the closing table. And that's when the borrowers start complaining, when you make a mistake and you inconvenience them with, having to meet them again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Outside of that, get training, and we can talk about this in, another session, but notarizations. Make sure the state and county, make sure the names are correct in the notary blocks. Always remember, your notarization is you speaking to the powers that may be of who stood before you. And again, we can save this for another one, but it's outside of documents. The two signings that cause me the most grief at Unlimited Inc., no matter what I do, no matter how clear my instructions are going to be POA signings and split signings. Those are by far the two that get executed incorrectly most of the time, that cause a full re-sign. And those are not fun when I have to deal with title on those.
Yeah. I think we should do another show and kind of dive deep into those areas that notaries tend to make mistakes. Because if we can help the industry through this show and through other ways to become better, I mean, we all win. It's a win-win situation in this case. And so, and then the other thing is, you talk about getting trained, and I agree. It's crucial. Back when I got started over 20 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff available. I mean, social media. Travis, when I first started, I had a pager, and then I would have to call the number, and we didn't have printers at home. They had to ship documents to us. It's a whole new world, right? Now the problem, I think, is if there's too much information. I mean, you can go on YouTube or all these social media platforms, and you type in notary, it's way too much. And so I think the problem now is overload of information. It's just almost, where does a notary start? So I just want you guys, and I'm going to announce it now. I've been working on redesigning my website. It's basically done. And so if you're a brand new notary, or newer notary, and you feel overwhelmed, you don't know where to start, you don't know which of the different courses to take or what advice, it just becomes too much. Oftentimes, it's more than you need for what you're trying to achieve at first. And so what I've done in my website is I've kind of helped the newer notaries who are trying to figure out where they're at and what their next step should be. I've created the content on my website to help guide you through what you should really be focusing on, so you're not wasting time and, more importantly, a bunch of money on courses that probably aren't going to be the thing you need right now, right? So if you're new, if you want that guidance and that sort of step-by-step, what's next for me type of guidance, I would encourage you to go to my website, notarybusinesstalk.com, and kind of check that out. But hey, Travis, thank you so much for being on the show, man. This was a lot of fun. You gave us a lot of great value. I think I'm going to get a lot of great feedback out of this episode. And so thank you again. And for those of you who are listening, stay tuned. We will probably do another episode with Travis. And so if you have any questions for him, definitely let me know about those. And until next time, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. And Be well, take care, and stay productive. Bye now.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Notary Business Talk. To learn more about becoming a notary entrepreneur or to find out how Abraham can help you achieve your business goals, visit notarybusinesstalk.com.